All right, here we are on page 4. So we are still solving, and at this point, do we have, let's see. Let's hit our problems that are, well, actually, I take it back. We got a little bit left to do on page 3. So let's start with number 20. There is more than one type of x, so we will be factoring this, or that's the attempt to factor. So first I'm just looking for a GCF, which I don't notice. So I'm going to make my x, and I need factors of negative 15 that make 14, and I will see that that is a 1 and 15, with the 1 being negative. So when I go for my parentheses, my factors, x and x will not be enough. So I'll definitely need at least x squared, and in one of them put a 3x squared. So now when I multiply my first terms, I do make that 3x squared. So now I can go to my loops. We will have the top loop make this 15x squared. We'll have the bottom loop make the 1x squared. So 3 times what can make 15 is going to be a positive 5, and x times what can make a positive 1, that's a positive 1, or I'm sorry, x squared times what can make a positive 1x squared. And I'm just going to take each factor, and I'm going to set them equal to 0. So starting with the 3x squared plus 1, I'm going to subtract the 1, divide the 3, and get negative 1/3. And now I'm going to square root. So once I square root, I'm going to get 2 answers. I'm going to get a positive and negative. I'm going to get an I because I'm taking the square root of a negative number, and then 1/3 will go in the check mark. All right, the next one, I'll take x squared plus 5, set e equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract the 5 over, and then I'm going to square root. And when I square root, again, I'm going to get 2 answers, positive and negative. I'm going to get an I because I'm taking the square root of a negative number, and then the 5 will be inside the square root. So I get my 4 answers that was needed. 23, excuse me, is just one type of x. We will just go about isolating the x because when this type of problem was brought in, we did not know about SOAP yet. So first I'm going to add the 18 to the 117. And when I do that, I get 5x cubed with the 135. And then I'm going to divide by 5. And that's going to give me a 27. And then it's supposed to be a 2 cube root, which remember, just press the math button and choose that 4th option. But the cube root of 27 is 3. And then if I think about my shape, I've got a kind of wavy line. I've got the flat line, no slope of 117, where it's missing, where they're meeting at 3. And this part says I want the part that is below the line. So that would be here. This is technically an arrow on the left, so negative infinity. So my alligator will be happy from negative infinity to 3, and both parentheses, because the original inequality is not underlined. All right, let's finish our solving. This is more of our latest chapter. So let's just start with 28. The first thing I'm looking for is a GCF. I don't notice a number nor an x. So because there's 4 things, I'm going to group them. And I will take out x squared and be left with 2x minus 5, which is the goal for the second one. I should have a 2x minus 5. So I'm trying to figure out what is that GCF. So if you can't see it, remember, you can always take this negative 45 divided by the negative 5 and get a negative 9. All right, so not negative 9, positive 9. All right, so now when I go for my factors, this matching set that connects the 2x minus 5 is one of them. And the things on the outside, those GCFs, become the other. And now I'm just going to set each factor equal to 0. For the one on the left, I'm going to add the 5 and divide the 2. And I will just leave it as a fraction. For the next one, I'm going to subtract the 9. So I will be square rooting. When I square root, I get 2 answers. I'll be taking the square root of 9, which is a very nice number of 3. I'm taking the square root of a negative number, so I have an I. So my 3 answers are right there. The next problem, this is a SOAP problem, and I do expect you to complete it as a SOAP problem. So the first thing I need to do is the cubed root. So the cubed root of my 216 is, and x cubed that is 6x. The cubed root of my 1s are 1s, and I'll do my little grouping. All right, so we'll get parentheses close together, further apart, and the closer together, it is just the cube roots that pop in there. In the longer set, I'll multiply the 6x and 6x for 36x squared. I'll multiply the 6 and the x, the 6x and the 1 for 6x, and I'll multiply the 1s for 1. I already started the SOAP, but it goes same, opposite, always positive. So when I take my first set and set this equal to 0, I'll just add the 1 and divide the 6. So there's one of my 3 answers. Remember, in the second half of SOAP, it will be the quadratic formula every time. So it's going to go x equals the opposite of b. B is 6, so I'll write down -6. And then I will take b and square it. So 6 squared minus 4 times a and c. And then all of that will be divided by 2 times 36. All right. So my denominator, if I just take 2 times my 36, is 72. If I go for my what's in the check mark, I will get -108. And now I'm just going to run -108 through my, 108 through my factor program and just see, are there any factors of 108 that are perfect, because 1 is not. And I actually see a couple, but so I'm going to choose the largest set, which will be 9 and 12. So I'm going to take this and change it to, sorry, not 9 and 12. What is the biggest one? 3 and 36. So 36 and 3. And then this becomes -6 plus or minus 6 with an I and a square root of 3 over 72. And then I try for my triangle. As it turns out, I can divide everything in here, let's see, by 6. So above 29 is going to be my final answer. So my final answer is a -1 plus or minus 1i over 12. All right, next problem. I see 4 terms, lots of different x's, so I'm going to try to find a GCF. There is not a number nor an x. So because of there's 4 terms, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to try to factor out an x squared, which gives me an x minus 7. So that means the other set needs to be an x minus 7. And if I try to see what are they factoring out, and I take 40 and divide it by -7, that's actually not a very, I get a very long decimal. So this is something I cannot factor. So instead, what I have to do is go to the y equals button on my calculator, which I'm typing in right now. I'm going to access the table by hitting second graph, and I'm just looking for some numbers that where a y column is 0. So I'm going to need this space. So I see 4 works, 5 works, so I'll just put a 4 here. All right, so here's 1, -7, there's 2 and 40. I should get 0 when I'm done, so let's see if that happens. And it does. So the 0 was the remainder, which meant it worked. 10 is the constant, x squared. So we're now going to try to factor x squared minus 3x minus 10. I'm going to make my x factors of -10 that make -3. And again, factors, I'm multiplying these factors of -10x squared that make the middle number -3. And I'll see that I can use 5 and 2, with 5 being negative. And now when I go for my factors, are x and x enough to make x squared? They are. So there's my loops. They both start with x, so it doesn't matter which one I work with to get me these numbers. So if I just start with this top loop, an x times a -5 makes a -5x. And when I do my bottom loop, an x times a +2 makes the bottom loop. And then my answers are -2, 5. And remember, there's 3 answers. So the one that we used in the very beginning, that 4, is my final answer. All right, let's see how much of this page we can get through. So what we're going to do first is 31, 32, 33, 34. We are writing all of these equations. So let's start actually with 34, which is the most recent. And we're writing it like this. So, you know, we're going to put some numbers in here. I'll get some numbers in here in just a moment, but that's the idea. And I see at -4, it crosses, so -4 is going to show up once. And at 3, it's bouncing, so 3 is going to show up twice as an answer. So that means when I make my parentheses, I'm going to have an x minus 3 and another x minus 3, because those parentheses make my 2 3s. And then I'll have one more as x plus 4. So in order to solve for a, you always need some additional point, some point that's not on the x-axis. So we'll be using this point. This will become my x. This will become my y. So it'll be -18 equals a. And then wherever there's an x, I'm putting in a 0. And then I need to get this all down to one number. So that becomes 2 -3s and a +4. And when I multiply those, I get a +36. And now to get a by itself, I'm going to divide by 36. And here is my a, which can also just simplify to -1/2, or you can always use the decimal. So now my final answer, I take that a and I just put it back in here. So y equals -1/2. Instead of writing x minus 3 twice, I can write it once with the squared and then the x plus 4. So there's my final answer for 34. So let's go for 31 and 32 because they're going to be similar. So let's start with 32. So again, I need to be using this format. We use vertex form. That's actually so when we do, sorry, I had to pause the video. When we do 32 and 31, we use our vertex form, and it even says it in the directions, okay? So what I'm gonna do is find my vertex, which is 3, 4, which means they went x plus, sorry, not plus, minus 3, that says I went right 3, and then up 4. I'll have to figure out what a is. And again, to do that, I need some other point that's on my graph. So you actually have a couple to choose from. I think this is the easiest one right here of 0, -2. So in for y, I put -2. A, I'm going to have 0 minus 3 squared plus 4. So I just clean this kind of area up right here. So that becomes a -3, and -3 squared is a 9, so it becomes 9a plus 4. And now I can just subtract the 4 over for -6, divide the 9. There's my a value, which you can turn into -2/3. You can simplify it. So my final answer is y equals my a. And then the rest. So every time we write the equation, we want our final answer to have x and y in them, just like we did on 34. All right, next video, we'll finish up this page.